Maria Santos wiped her hands on her apron as she climbed the grand staircase of the Whitmore mansion for what she knew would be one of the last times. The ornate banister felt cold under her calloused palm, a stark reminder of the 23 years she had spent polishing every inch of this sprawling estate. At 52, Maria had dedicated more than half her life to caring for this house and its inhabitants, but nothing could have prepared her for what lay ahead. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors that Maria had scrubbed countless times. She paused at the landing, adjusting the breakfast tray in her hands. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who had employed her since she was 29, was dying. The doctors had given her 2 weeks, maybe 3 if she was lucky. The cancer had spread too far, too fast, and even the best medical care money could buy couldn't stop what was coming. Maria knocked gently on the bedroom door before entering. Eleanor lay propped up against silk pillows, her once vibrant red, hair now thin and gray, her emerald eyes still sharp despite the morphine. The room smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a strange combination that had become familiar over the past month. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Maria said softly, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I brought your tea just the way you like. It, with honey and lemon?" Eleanor's lips curved into a weak smile. "You know, Maria, after all these years, I think you could call me Eleanor. Don't you think we're past formalities?" Maria felt her throat tighten. In 23 years, Mrs. Whitmore had never suggested such a thing. The boundary between employer and employee had always been clear, respectful, but distant. "I wouldn't feel right about that, ma'am. It wouldn't be proper." Eleanor chuckled, which turned into a coughing fit. Maria quickly helped her sit up straighter and handed her a glass of water. When the coughing subsided, Eleanor grasped Maria's hand with surprising strength. "Maria, I need to tell you something important. My lawyer will be coming this afternoon to finalize my will. I've made provisions for you, of course. You've been more loyal to this family than anyone had a right to expect." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She had wondered about her future, what would happen when Mrs. Whitmore passed away. The woman's 3 children lived in different states, and had made it clear they intended to sell the house immediately after the funeral. Maria had been preparing herself to look for new employment, despite her age making it increasingly difficult. "Thank you, ma'am. That's very generous of you. There's something else," Eleanor continued, her voice growing weaker. "Something I need you to promise me you'll do after I'm gone. It's very important to me, Maria. More important than anything else." The urgency in Eleanor's voice made Maria lean closer. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Anything you need." Eleanor reached into the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out a small, ornate silver key. It was unlike any key Maria had seen in the house, despite knowing every room, every closet, every hidden corner of the mansion. "This key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box number 742. After my funeral, I need you to go there and retrieve what's inside." "But Maria, this is crucial. You must go alone. And you must not tell anyone about this. Not my children, not the lawyer, not anyone. Can you promise me that?" Maria stared at the key, feeling its weight in her palm. It seemed to hold more significance than such a small object should. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure you want me to do this? Maybe one of your children should—" "No," Eleanor interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "It has to be you, Maria. You're the only one I trust completely. My children, they're good people, but they don't understand some things about the past. This is something I should have dealt with years ago, but I was too afraid, too ashamed. Now it's too late for me to make it right, but you can do it for me." The weight of responsibility settled on Maria's shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had always been a simple woman, content with her modest life of cleaning, cooking, and caring for the Whitmore family. The idea of handling something secret, something so important that Mrs. Whitmore wouldn't trust her own children with it, felt overwhelming. "What am I supposed to do with whatever is in the box?" Maria asked quietly. Eleanor's eyes grew distant, as if she were seeing something far away. "There will be a letter inside addressed to you. It will explain everything. Maria, I know this is a lot to ask, but I need you to follow the instructions in that letter exactly. Promise me you will, no matter how strange or difficult it might seem." Maria looked into Eleanor's eyes and saw something she had never seen before: vulnerability, fear, and a desperate hope. In all the years she had worked for this woman, Eleanor had been strong, confident, sometimes demanding, but always in control. Now she looked fragile and frightened, like a child asking for forgiveness. "I promise, Mrs. Whitmore, I'll do exactly what you ask." Eleanor's grip on Maria's hand relaxed, and she sank back into her pillows with obvious relief. "Thank you, Maria. You don't know what this means to me. Hide the key somewhere safe, and remember, after the funeral, but not before. Timing is important." As Maria tucked the key into her apron pocket, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. The woman she had served faithfully for over 2 decades was asking her to keep a secret that seemed to weigh more heavily on Eleanor's conscience than her approaching death. That afternoon, as Maria served tea to Eleanor's lawyer, she noticed how the man kept glancing at her with a strange expression, as if he knew something she didn't. The silver key felt warm against her leg through her apron pocket, a constant reminder of the promise she had made and the mystery that awaited her. Eleanor Whitmore passed away 3 days later on a rainy Tuesday morning. Maria was holding her hand when she took her final breath, just as the sun was rising over the estate grounds. The house fell into an eerie silence that seemed to echo through every room Maria had spent decades keeping immaculate. The funeral was held on Friday at St. Matthew's Cathedral downtown. Maria wore her only black dress, a simple cotton garment she had bought years ago for such occasions. She sat in the back pew, watching as Eleanor's 3 children, Robert, Patricia, and James, greeted the hundreds of mourners who had come to pay their respects. The Whitmore family had been prominent in the city for generations, and Eleanor's passing marked the end of an era. During the service, Maria found herself studying the faces of Eleanor's children. Robert, the eldest at 45, was a successful investment banker in New York. Patricia, 42, was a surgeon in Chicago. James, the youngest at 38, ran a tech company in California. They were all accomplished, wealthy, and had visited their mother perhaps twice a year. Maria had spent more time with Eleanor in the past month than her children had in the past decade. After the burial, the family gathered at the mansion for the reading of the will. Maria was surprised when the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, asked her to stay. She stood quietly in the corner of the grand library as he read through Eleanor's final wishes. As promised, Eleanor had left Maria a generous sum, $50,000 and full ownership of the small cottage on the estate grounds where Maria had lived for the past 15 years. "This is very generous of Mother," Patricia said, nodding approvingly at Maria. "You certainly earned it after all these years of faithful service." Robert cleared his throat. "We'll be putting the main house on the market immediately. The real estate agent thinks we can get at least $2 million for it, maybe more. Maria, you're welcome to stay in the cottage as long as you like. The property line was drawn to give you about an acre, so you'll have your privacy." Maria thanked them quietly, but her mind was elsewhere. The silver key seemed to burn in her purse, and Eleanor's words echoed in her head. After the funeral, but not before. Timing is important. That evening, after the last of the mourners had left and Eleanor's children had returned to their hotels to plan their flights home, Maria sat alone in her cottage. The main house loomed dark and empty across the manicured lawn, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the night. For the first time in 23 years, Maria felt truly alone. She pulled the silver key from her purse and held it up to the lamplight. It was intricately carved with a pattern she couldn't identify, and despite its age, It showed no signs of tarnish. Tomorrow, she would have to find the courage to go to the bank and discover what secret Eleanor had been carrying all these years. The next morning, Maria dressed carefully in her best outfit, a navy blue suit she had worn to church for special occasions. She had never been inside First National Bank before, having always done her modest banking at the small credit union near the grocery store. The imposing granite building downtown made her feel small and out of place. At the front desk, she asked about accessing a safety deposit box. The clerk, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, looked at Maria with barely concealed skepticism. "Do you have the proper documentation?" the clerk asked. Maria showed her the key and explained that Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore had given it to her. The clerk's demeanor changed immediately when she heard the Whitmore name. "Oh, of course. Let me get Mr. Patterson, our branch manager. He handled Mrs. Whitmore's accounts personally." Mr. Patterson was a distinguished man in his 60s who greeted Maria with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Santos, isn't it? Mrs. Whitmore spoke of you often. She was very fond of you." "She spoke of me?" Maria was surprised. She couldn't imagine Eleanor discussing her household staff with her banker. "Oh yes, many times over the years. She said you were the most trustworthy person she knew. She actually came in about 6 months ago to make arrangements for you to have access to Box 742. Very unusual, but she was quite insistent about the specific procedures." Maria followed Mr. Patterson down a marble staircase to the vault level. The safety deposit box room was lined with hundreds of small metal doors, each requiring 2 keys to open. Mr. Patterson used the bank's key while Maria used Eleanor's silver key. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the small room. "I'll leave you alone," Mr. Patterson said, handing Maria the long metal box. "Take all the time you need. There's a private viewing room just through that door." Maria's hands trembled as she carried the box into the small, windowless room. She sat at the simple wooden table and stared at the box for several minutes before finding the courage to lift the lid. Inside, she found a thick manila envelope with her name written on it in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Beneath the envelope were several other items that made Maria's breath catch in her throat. Bundles of cash held together with rubber bands, old photographs, and what appeared to be legal documents. She opened the envelope with shaking fingers and unfolded several pages of Eleanor's elegant script. "My dear Maria, if you are reading this, then I have passed away and you have kept your promise to me. I pray that you can forgive me for what I am about to ask of you, and for the secrets I have kept hidden for so many years. The money in this box, nearly $200,000, does not belong to me. It belongs to someone else, someone I wronged terribly 40 years ago. I was young and foolish and thought I could keep this secret forever, but my conscience has given me no peace. Maria, I need you to find a woman named Rosa Martinez. She would be about 72 years old now. The last address I had for her was in San Antonio, Texas, but that was many years ago. The photographs in this box will help you identify her. She is the woman in the pictures with the baby. Rosa worked for my family when I was 19 years old. She was my son Robert's nanny when he was an infant. What happened between us, what I did to her, it has haunted me every day since." Maria's hands shook as she continued reading, unable to believe what Eleanor was revealing to her. The perfect, dignified woman she had served for over 2 decades had been harboring a secret that was about to turn Maria's simple world completely upside down. Maria's heart pounded as she continued reading Eleanor's letter. The words seemed to leap off the page, each sentence more shocking than the last. Rosa was not just Robert's nanny, she was a talented seamstress who had come to work for us from Mexico. She spoke broken English but was incredibly gifted with her hands. My mother hired her to help with the household and to watch Robert while I finished my education. Rosa was only 22, just 3 years older than me, but she had already experienced more hardship than I could imagine. She had a baby daughter, Isabel, who was about 6 months old when Rosa started working for us. Rosa's husband had died in an accident shortly after Isabel was born, leaving Rosa with nothing. She was desperate for work and grateful for the opportunity to live in our servants' quarters with her baby. Maria, what I did was unforgivable. I was engaged to Robert's father, Charles, and we were planning our wedding. But Charles was often away on business trips, sometimes for weeks at a time. I was lonely and confused about my feelings. Rosa was kind to me in a way that no one else was. She listened to my fears about marriage and motherhood. She taught me to sew and shared stories about her life in Mexico. I began to rely on her emotionally in ways that were inappropriate for an employer. And then one evening, when Charles had been gone for nearly a month, something happened between Rosa and me that changed both of our lives forever. Maria had to stop reading. She put the letter down and stared at the wall, trying to process what Eleanor was revealing. The implications were staggering. Eleanor Whitmore, the pillar of society, the woman who had attended church every Sunday for 40 years, was confessing to something that would have scandalized their conservative community 4 decades ago. She picked up one of the photographs from the box. It showed a young Eleanor, barely recognizable with her bright red hair and vibrant smile, standing next to a beautiful Hispanic woman holding a baby. Both women looked happy, carefree even. There was something in their body language, the way they stood close together, that suggested an intimacy beyond employer and employee. Maria forced herself to continue reading. What happened between Rosa and me lasted only a few weeks, but it was the most genuine connection I had ever felt with another person. For the first time in my sheltered life, I understood what it meant to truly care for someone. But when Charles returned and our wedding date approached, I panicked. I was terrified of what people would think, what my family would do if they discovered the truth. The year was 1984. Maria. You know how different things were then. I was a coward, and I made the most selfish decision of my life. I told Rosa that she had to leave immediately. I gave her a week's wages and told her she could no longer work for us. But Maria, this is the part that has tormented me for 40 years. I accused Rosa of stealing from us to justify her dismissal. I planted jewelry in her room and then discovered it missing from my mother's bedroom. When I found the jewelry among Rosa's belongings, my parents called the police. Rosa was arrested. Maria. She spent 3 months in jail because of my lie, and her baby Isabel was placed in temporary foster care. By the time Rosa was released, I was married to Charles and pregnant with Robert. Rosa came to our house one last time, begging for her job back, swearing she had never stolen anything. She told me that she had lost custody of Isabel permanently because of her criminal record. She said she forgave me for ending our relationship, but she begged me to tell the truth about the theft so she could get her daughter back. I turned her away, Maria. I looked into the eyes of the woman I had loved and let her believe I thought she was a thief. It was the most cowardly thing I have ever done. Maria felt sick to her stomach. She thought about all the times Eleanor had lectured her about honesty and integrity. The woman had been living with this terrible secret while presenting herself as a moral authority to everyone around her. The letter continued for several more pages, detailing how Eleanor had tried to find Rosa over the years, but had lost track of her. Eleanor had hired private investigators 3 different times, but Rosa seemed to have disappeared completely after leaving the city in 1984. The money in this box represents everything I saved over the years intending to make amends to Rosa. It includes the jewelry I claimed she stole. I had it appraised last year, and it's worth nearly $30,000. The rest is money I set aside every month for 40 years, thinking someday I would find the courage to face what I had done. Maria, I need you to find Rosa Martinez and give her this money. More importantly, I need you to give her the letter I have written to her, which is also in this box. In that letter, I have confessed everything and provided a notarized statement admitting that I lied about the theft. It may be too late to help her legally, but at least she will know the truth. I know this is an enormous burden to place on you, but you are the only person I trust to handle this properly. You have always been honest and kind, qualities I failed to show when it mattered most. Please find Rosa and tell her how sorry I am. Tell her that not a day has passed that I haven't regretted my cowardice. Maria found the second letter in the box, sealed and addressed to Rosa Martinez. She also found a notarized confession signed by Eleanor, admitting to planting the jewelry and lying to the police. The document was dated just 2 months ago when Eleanor's illness had taken a serious turn. At the bottom of the box, Maria discovered something that made her gasp. It was a birth certificate for Isabel Martinez, born in 1983. Clipped to it was a note in Eleanor's handwriting. I hired investigators to find out what happened to Isabel after Rosa lost custody. She was adopted by a family named Johnson in Houston when she was 2 years old. Her adopted name is Isabel Johnson. The investigators believe she still lives in Texas. Maria sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Eleanor was asking her to do. She was supposed to find a 72-year-old woman who might be anywhere in the country, deliver a confession that would dredge up 40-year-old pain, and somehow make amends for Eleanor's decades-old betrayal. But as she looked at the photographs again, particularly one showing Rosa's face filled with genuine affection as she looked at Eleanor, Maria understood why this had haunted Eleanor for so long. Rosa hadn't just been an employee. She had been someone Eleanor had truly cared about, someone whose life Eleanor had destroyed out of fear and selfishness. Maria carefully packed everything back into the box. She now understood why Eleanor had chosen her for this task. Eleanor's children would never understand or forgive their mother's secret. They would probably destroy the letters and keep the money, considering it their inheritance. But Eleanor had known that Maria, despite her simple life, had the integrity to see this through. As she left the bank, Maria felt the weight of her promise settling over her like a heavy cloak. She had never traveled beyond the state borders, had never conducted any kind of investigation, and had no idea how to find someone who had been missing for 40 years. But she had given her word to a dying woman, and Maria Santos had never broken a promise in her life. Maria's hands trembled as she stood outside Riverside Elementary School in Austin, Texas. Through the chain-link fence, she could see children playing during recess, their laughter carrying on the warm afternoon breeze. According to David's research, Isabel Johnson taught 3rd grade here, and school would be ending in less than an hour. The flight to Austin had been terrifying for Maria, who gripped the armrests during takeoff and landing. But now, standing on unfamiliar ground in a city she had never visited, she felt a different kind of fear. What if Isabel didn't want to hear about her past? What if learning the truth about her mother's fate caused more pain than comfort? Maria had checked into a modest hotel near the airport and spent the morning rehearsing what she would say. She couldn't simply approach a stranger with such devastating information. She needed to be careful, gentle, and prepared for any reaction. At 3:15, the school bell rang, and Maria watched as children began streaming out of the building toward waiting buses and parents. She positioned herself near the main entrance, hoping to catch sight of Isabel before approaching her. 20 minutes later, as the crowd thinned, Maria saw her. The woman emerging from the school building was unmistakably the person from the social media photos, but seeing her in person took Maria's breath away. Isabel Johnson had Rosa's eyes, the same warm, intelligent expression that Maria had seen in Eleanor's old photographs. She was petite like her mother had been, with shoulder-length dark hair and a gentle smile, as she said goodbye to her fellow teachers. Maria approached cautiously. "Excuse me, are you Isabel Johnson?" Isabel turned, her expression friendly but curious. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Maria Santos. I've traveled here from back east because I have some information about your birth mother, Rosa Martinez." The change in Isabel's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened and she grasped Maria's arm. "You knew my mother. Is she alive?" "I need to talk to you privately," Maria said gently. "This is complicated, and there's a lot to explain. Would you be willing to meet me somewhere we can talk? Maybe this evening?" Isabel's voice was barely a whisper. "I've been looking for her my entire adult life. The adoption agency said all records were sealed, and I could never find any trace of her. Please tell me she's alive." Maria's heart broke seeing the hope and desperation in Isabel's eyes. "Let's meet tonight, and I'll tell you everything I know. Is there a quiet restaurant or coffee shop where we could talk?" They arranged to meet at a small cafe near Isabel's home at 7 o'clock. Maria spent the afternoon in her hotel room, rehearsing how to tell this woman that her mother had been wrongly accused of theft, had lost custody of her daughter because of a lie, and might have spent the last 40 years believing she was considered a criminal by the only person who had ever truly loved her. That evening, Maria arrived at the cafe early and chose a corner table away from other patrons. When Isabel arrived, she looked nervous but hopeful, carrying a small folder with her. "I brought everything I have about my adoption," Isabel said, sitting down. "It's not much, but maybe it will help you tell me more about my mother." Maria looked at this accomplished, kind woman, a teacher, a mother, a pillar of her community, and felt the weight of what she was about to reveal. "Isabel, before I begin, I need you to know that what I'm going to tell you is difficult. Some of it is beautiful, but some of it is very painful." Isabel nodded, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I've been preparing myself for difficult news my whole life. Please, just tell me about her." Maria began slowly, describing how Eleanor Whitmore had employed Rosa as a nanny and seamstress in 1984. She showed Isabel the photographs, watching as the younger woman's eyes filled with tears, seeing her mother for the first time since infancy. "She was beautiful," Isabel whispered, touching the photograph gently. "And I can see there's something in her face when she looks at me. She loved me." "She loved you very much," Maria confirmed. "According to Mrs. Whitmore, losing you was the greatest tragedy of Rosa's life." Then Maria began the difficult part of the story. She explained about Eleanor's relationship with Rosa, being careful to present it with dignity and respect. Isabel listened without judgment, occasionally asking quiet questions. "So my mother and Mrs. Whitmore were together? Romantically?" "For a brief time, yes." Mrs. Whitmore described it as the most genuine connection she had ever felt with another person. But when her fiancé returned and their wedding approached, she became frightened of what people would think. Maria's voice grew heavy as she explained Eleanor's betrayal, the planted jewelry, the false accusation, Rosa's arrest and imprisonment. Isabel's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, and finally, a deep understanding. "My mother went to jail because Mrs. Whitmore was afraid of being judged for loving her?" "Yes. And when Rosa was released, she had lost custody of you permanently because of her criminal record. Mrs. Whitmore refused to tell the truth, even when Rosa begged her to clear her name so she could get you back." Isabel was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, she looked up with tears streaming down her face. "All these years, I wondered if my mother had abandoned me. If maybe she was involved with drugs or crime. I created 100 different stories in my head about why she couldn't keep me, but she was innocent. She lost me because someone she trusted betrayed her." Maria reached across the table and took Isabel's hand. "Your mother was completely innocent, and Mrs. Whitmore spent the rest of her life trying to find Rosa to make amends. She died 2 weeks ago, and her final request was that I find your mother and deliver this." Maria placed Eleanor's confession letter and the money on the table. Isabel stared at the sealed envelope addressed to Rosa Martinez in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. "Is my mother Maria's hands trembled as she stood outside Riverside Elementary School in Austin, Texas. Through the chain-link fence, she could see children playing during recess, their laughter carrying on the warm afternoon breeze. According to David's research, Isabel Johnson taught third grade here, and school would be ending in less than an hour. The flight to Austin had been terrifying for Maria, who gripped the armrests during takeoff and landing. But now, standing on unfamiliar ground in a city she had never visited, she felt a different kind of fear. What if Isabel didn't want to hear about her past? What if learning the truth about her mother's fate caused more pain than comfort? Maria had checked into a modest hotel near the airport and spent the morning rehearsing what she would say. She couldn't simply approach a stranger with such devastating information. She needed to be careful, gentle, and prepared for any reaction. At 3:15, the school bell rang, and Maria watched as children began streaming out of the building toward waiting buses and parents. She positioned herself near the main entrance, hoping to catch sight of Isabel before approaching her. 20 minutes later, as the crowd thinned, Maria saw her. The woman emerging from the school building was unmistakably the person from the social media photos, but seeing her in person took Maria's breath away. Isabel Johnson had Rosa's eyes, the same warm, intelligent expression that Maria had seen in Eleanor's old photographs. She was petite, like her mother had been, with shoulder-length dark hair and a gentle smile as she said goodbye to her fellow teachers. Maria approached cautiously. "Excuse me, are you Isabel Johnson?" Isabel turned, her expression friendly but curious. "Yes, I am. Can I help you? My name is Maria Santos. I've traveled here from back east because I have some information about your birth mother, Rosa Martinez." The change in Isabel's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened, and she grasped Maria's arm. "You knew my mother? Is she alive?" "I need to talk to you privately," Maria said gently. "This is complicated, and there's a lot to explain. Would you be willing to meet me somewhere we can talk? Maybe this evening?" Isabel's voice was barely a whisper. "I've been looking for her my entire adult life. The adoption agency said all records were sealed and I could never find any trace of her. Please tell me she's alive." Maria's heart broke, seeing the hope and desperation in Isabel's eyes. "Let's meet tonight, and I'll tell you everything I know. Is there a quiet restaurant or coffee shop where we could talk?" They arranged to meet at a small cafe near Isabel's home at 7 o'clock. Maria spent the afternoon in her hotel room, rehearsing how to tell this woman that her mother had been wrongly accused of theft, had lost custody of her daughter because of a lie, and might have spent the last 40 years believing she was considered a criminal by the only person who had ever truly loved her. That evening, Maria arrived at the cafe early and chose a corner table away from other patrons. When Isabel arrived, she looked nervous but hopeful, carrying a small folder with her. "I brought everything I have about my adoption," Isabel said, sitting down. "It's not much, but maybe it will help you tell me more about my mother." Maria looked at this accomplished, kind woman, a teacher, a mother, a pillar of her community, and felt the weight of what she was about to reveal. "Isabel, before I begin, I need you to know that what I'm going to tell you is difficult. Some of it is beautiful, but some of it is very painful." Isabel nodded, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I've been preparing myself for difficult news my whole life. Please, just tell me about her." Maria began slowly, describing how Eleanor Whitmore had employed Rosa as a nanny and seamstress in 1984. She showed Isabel the photographs, watching as the younger woman's eyes filled with tears, seeing her mother for the first time since infancy. "She was beautiful," Isabel whispered, touching the photograph gently. "And I can see there's something in her face when she looks at me. She loved me." "She loved you very much," Maria confirmed. "According to Mrs. Whitmore, losing you was the greatest tragedy of Rosa's life." Then Maria began the difficult part of the story. She explained about Eleanor's relationship with Rosa, being careful to present it with dignity and respect. Isabel listened without judgment, occasionally asking quiet questions. So my mother and Mrs. Whitmore were together? Romantically? For a brief time, yes. Mrs. Whitmore described it as the most genuine connection she had ever felt with another person. But when her fiancé returned and their wedding approached, she became frightened of what people would think. Maria's voice grew heavy as she explained Eleanor's betrayal, the planted jewelry, the false accusation, Rosa's arrest and imprisonment. Isabel's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, and finally, a deep understanding. Mother went to jail because Mrs. Whitmore was afraid of being judged for loving her? Yes. And when Rosa was released, she had lost custody of you permanently because of her criminal record. Mrs. Whitmore refused to tell the truth, even when Rosa begged her to clear her name so she could get you back. Isabel was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Finally, she looked up with tears streaming down her face. All these years, I wondered if my mother had abandoned me, if maybe she was involved with drugs or crime. I created 100 different stories in my head about why she couldn't keep me, but she was innocent. She lost me because someone she trusted betrayed her. Maria reached across the table and took Isabel's hand. Your mother was completely innocent, and Mrs. Whitmore spent the rest of her life trying to find Rosa to make amends. She died 2 weeks ago, and her final request was that I find your mother and deliver this. Maria placed Eleanor's confession letter and the money on the table. Isabel stared at the sealed envelope addressed to Rosa Martinez in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. Is my mother still alive? Isabel asked quietly. I don't know, Maria admitted. Mrs. Whitmore tried to find her several times over the years, but never could. I was hoping you might have had some contact with her, or that you might know something that could help us find her. Isabel shook her head sadly. I've searched everywhere. I hired a private investigator 3 years ago with my savings, but he found nothing after 1986. It's like she disappeared completely. They sat in silence for several minutes, both women absorbing the magnitude of the situation. Finally, Isabel opened the folder she had brought. I have something that might help, she said, pulling out a faded piece of paper. The adoption agency gave this to my adoptive parents when I turned 18. It's the only thing they had that belonged to my birth mother. Maria looked at the paper. It was a handwritten note in Spanish, with an English translation written below it in different handwriting. What does it say? Maria asked. Isabel's voice was soft as she read the translation. My dearest Isabel, if you are reading this, then you are grown and have questions about your past. I want you to know that giving you up was not my choice, and that I have loved you every day since we were separated. If you ever want to find me, look for me in the place where the hearts remember. Your loving mother, Rosa Martinez. Maria frowned, studying the cryptic message. The place where the hearts remember? What could that mean? I've been trying to figure that out for 23 years, Isabel said. I thought maybe it referred to a place in Mexico where she grew up, but the private investigator couldn't find any records of her family there either. Suddenly, Maria had an idea. Isabel, do you know if your mother was religious? Catholic, perhaps? I assume so. Most Mexican families are Catholic, right? Maria nodded thoughtfully. There's a tradition in some Hispanic communities about leaving messages or mementos at places that hold spiritual significance. Churches, shrines, places where people go to pray for lost loved ones. Maybe the place where the hearts remember refers to somewhere like that. Isabel's eyes lit up with hope. But that could be anywhere. There are thousands of churches and shrines across the country. Not necessarily, Maria said, her excitement growing. Your mother worked in our city before she disappeared. Maybe she never left the area. Maybe she's been staying close, hoping you would someday come looking for her there. Isabel leaned forward eagerly. You think she might still be in your hometown? It's possible. David, my nephew who helped me find you, he's very good with computers. Maybe we can search for churches or community centers in our area that serve Hispanic families, places where someone might go to pray for a lost child. That night, Isabel called her husband and explained that she needed to take a few days off, work to pursue a lead about her birth mother. Maria was amazed by how supportive Isabel's family was, how quickly they understood the importance of this search. The next morning, Isabel drove Maria to the Austin airport. But this time, Maria wasn't traveling alone. Isabel had decided to come with her, unable to bear the thought of staying behind while someone else searched for her mother. On the flight back east, Isabel studied the photographs of Rosa over and over again, memorizing every detail of her mother's face. She looks so young here, Isabel said. She was only 22 when she lost me. She's had an entire lifetime to wonder what happened to her baby. And you've had a lifetime wondering about your mother, Maria replied. Maybe it's time for both of you to get some answers. When they landed, David was W. The drive to Our Lady of Reunited Hearts took 45 minutes through winding country roads. Maria sat in the passenger seat of David's car, clutching Eleanor's box of documents, while Isabel sat in the back, staring out the window at the passing landscape where her mother might have spent the last 4 decades of her life. The church was smaller than Maria had expected, a modest stone building surrounded by ancient oak trees. Behind the main structure, they could see a separate garden area with what appeared to be a shrine. Several cars were parked in the gravel lot, suggesting that afternoon services might be in progress. What if she's not here today? Isabel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we'll come back tomorrow, and the day after that, Maria replied firmly. We've waited 40 years. We can wait a little longer. They walked slowly toward the shrine garden, following a stone pathway lined with small memorial plaques. The shrine itself was breathtaking. A carved stone alcove containing a statue of the Virgin Mary, surrounded by hundreds of photographs, letters, and small personal mementos left by people praying for lost loved ones. And there, kneeling before the shrine with a small bucket of soapy water and a cloth, was an elderly Hispanic woman carefully cleaning the base of the statue. Isabel stopped walking so abruptly that Maria nearly collided with her. Even from behind, there was something unmistakably familiar about the woman's posture. The way she moved her hands, the careful attention she paid to her task. "Mama?" Isabel called out softly. The woman stopped cleaning and slowly turned around. When she saw Isabel, the cloth fell from her hands, and her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, overwhelming joy. Rosa Martinez was 72 years old now, her once dark hair completely gray, her face lined with the passage of time and the weight of loss, but her eyes were exactly the same as they had been in Eleanor's photographs. Warm, intelligent, and now filled with tears as she stared at the daughter she had lost 4 decades ago. "Isabel?" Rosa's voice was trembling, uncertain. "Mi niña? Is it really you?" Isabel ran toward her mother, crossing the distance between them in seconds. When they embraced, both women began sobbing. 40 years of separation, wondering and hoping finally ending in this sacred place where Rosa had come every week to pray for exactly this moment. Maria stood back, watching the reunion through her own tears. She thought about Eleanor, who had died believing she might never be able to make amends for her terrible betrayal. If Eleanor could see this moment, Maria knew her tortured soul would finally find peace. After several minutes, Rosa pulled back to look at Isabel's face, touching her cheeks as if to make sure she was real. "You're so beautiful," she whispered in accented English. I have dreamed of this day for so many years. But I was afraid. I was afraid you would never want to find me. I've been looking for you my whole life, Isabel replied, her voice choked with emotion. I never stopped looking. Rosa's eyes moved to Maria, who had been standing quietly nearby. Who is this lady? How did she help you find me? Isabel took her mother's hand and led her to a nearby bench. Mama, this is Maria Santos. She worked for Eleanor Whitmore for many years. Mrs. Whitmore died recently, and she asked Maria to find us. There's something very important you need to know about. What happened all those years ago? Rosa's expression changed when she heard Eleanor's name. Pain, confusion, and old hurt flashed across her face. Eleanor Whitmore? She is dead? Maria stepped forward, setting the box down beside the bench. Mrs. Whitmore asked me to give you this letter before she died. She wanted you to know the truth about what really happened in 1984. With shaking hands, Rosa took the sealed envelope addressed to her in Eleanor's handwriting. She stared at it for a long moment before carefully opening it. As Rosa read Eleanor's confession, her expression went through a range of emotions. Maria watched as Rosa learned that Eleanor had planted the jewelry, had lied to the police, had destroyed Rosa's life, not out of malice but out of fear and cowardice. She was afraid, Rosa said finally, looking up from the letter. All these years I thought she believed I was a thief. I thought she never trusted me, never cared about me, but she was just afraid of what people would think. Isabel took her mother's hand. She spent the rest of her life trying to find you, Mama. She saved money every month for 40 years to give back to you. She had this notarized confession prepared, so you would know the truth. Maria opened the box and showed Rosa the money, the jewelry, and the official statement clearing her name. Mrs. Whitmore wanted you to have this. She said it could never make up for what she took from you, but she hoped it might help somehow. Rosa stared at the contents of the box, then looked at her daughter. All these years I blamed myself. I thought maybe I had done something wrong, something that made Eleanor stop trusting me. I wondered if I had misunderstood her feelings, if what I thought we shared was just my imagination. What you shared was real, Maria said gently. Mrs. Whitmore told me it was the most genuine connection she ever felt with another person. She regretted her cowardice every day for the rest of her life. Rosa carefully folded Eleanor's letter and placed it back in the envelope. I forgive her, she said simply. Fear makes people do terrible things sometimes. But look what came from it. If none of this had happened, my Isabel might never have been motivated to search for me. Everything happens for a reason. Isabel squeezed her mother's hand. Tell me about your life, Mama. What happened to you after you lost me? Where have you been all these years? Rosa smiled sadly. I stayed in this area, hoping someday you might come looking for me here. I worked as a seamstress, just like I did for Eleanor's family. I never married, never had other children. You were my only baby, and I never stopped hoping I would see you again. I married a wonderful man named Michael, Isabel said. We have 2 children, your grandchildren. Sarah is 16 and Daniel is 14. They know I was adopted, and they've always wanted to meet their grandmother. Rosa's eyes filled with fresh tears. Grandchildren? I have grandchildren? And they're going to love you so much, Isabel said, pulling out her phone to show Rosa pictures of her teenagers. We live in Austin now, but we want you to come visit us? Or maybe you'd like to move closer to us? Maria watched as 3 generations of separation began to heal in this peaceful garden. She thought about Eleanor, who had carried her guilt and secret love for 40 years, and felt grateful that she had been chosen to deliver this final act of redemption. As the afternoon sun began to set, Rosa stood and walked back to the shrine. She placed Eleanor's letter at the base of the statue, next to the small photograph of baby Isabel that she had brought here every week for 4 decades. "Thank you, Eleanor," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing my daughter back to me." Maria, Isabel, and Rosa spent the evening at a nearby restaurant, filling in 40 years of separation with stories, laughter, and tears. Rosa showed them the small apartment where she had lived for the past 30 years, just 20 miles from where Eleanor had spent her final years consumed with guilt. 2 months later, Maria received a wedding invitation in the mail. Isabel and Michael were renewing their vows in Austin, and Rosa would be walking her daughter down the aisle, something she had dreamed of doing for 4 decades. The invitation included a note from Isabel. "Thank you for keeping your promise. To Mrs. Whitmore, you didn't just deliver a letter and some money, you gave us back our family." Maria kept the invitation on her mantelpiece in her cottage, next to a photograph that Rosa had sent her. It showed 3 generations of women, Rosa, Isabel, and Isabel's teenage daughter, Sarah, standing together, in Rosa's new apartment in Austin, where she had moved to be close to her family. Sometimes, late at night, Maria would look at that photograph and think about Eleanor Whitmore. She imagined Eleanor finally at peace, knowing that her final act on earth had been one of truth and redemption rather than fear and cowardice. The silver key that had started this journey now sat in Maria's jewelry box, no longer needed but treasured as a reminder that even the most devastating mistakes could be forgiven, and that love, even love complicated by fear and betrayal, could ultimately triumph over decades of separation and pain. Maria had kept her promise to a dying woman. But in doing so, she had discovered something she hadn't expected. That sometimes the most important journeys we take are not the ones we plan for ourselves, but the ones we take to heal the wounds of others. In bringing Rosa and Isabel together, Maria had found her own sense of purpose and meaning that went far beyond the simple life she had known in the Whitmore mansion. Eleanor Whitmore had asked for forgiveness through her final act of courage, and in a garden shrine dedicated to reunited hearts. That forgiveness had been granted by the woman who had never stopped loving her, even after 40 years of believing she had been betrayed.